trophy ceremony having dark thoughts. I think was the phrase you used after your 2022 final here. Can you just talk through, I guess, on paper it looks like you've kind of had this perfect career. You know, you won second Grand Slam by 21, but there have been some harder moments. Can you just talk about that and what...
Coco Gauff just revealed something that flips everything athletes are taught about hiding weakness on its head. She broke down in tears on court at the US Open, and instead of apologizing, she's explaining why showing that vulnerability actually made her stronger. For years, tennis players have been taught to wear emotional armor and act like nothing could ever bother them. Coco is tossing that rulebook aside, sharing how letting herself feel in the moment actually helped her win. This is changing the entire conversation around mental toughness. Here's my question. When did we decide that crying equals weakness instead of just being human? Coco sat down with FN journalists recently and offered some brutally honest takes on vulnerability, authenticity, and what true mental toughness really means in professional tennis. The heart of that conversation was her admission about crying mid-match at the US Open this year. Not after the match, not in the locker room with her team, on the court, in front of thousands of fans, with cameras capturing every second, and she still walked away with the win.
I was doubting myself, wondering if I would ever be able to succumb, and especially my mentality going into that match. I was crying like before the match and like so nervous and like literally couldn't breathe and stuff. So I was like, if I can't handle this, how am I going to handle it like again? And then obviously US Open happened, which I think that created that reaction. And now I just felt really ready today. And I was like, I'm just going to leave it all out there. And regardless of what happens, I can leave proud.
Let's break down exactly what she said, because the quote matters. Coco opened up about how early in her career, she felt like she had to be perfect all the time. She could feel the weight of everyone looking up to her, and that pressure convinced her she couldn't show any cracks. That's the classic athlete mindset drilled into players for decades. Be strong, don't show emotion, don't let your opponents see you struggle, and project confidence even when you don't feel it. That's what champions do, right? But Coco realized that mindset was actually holding her back, not helping her. She explained that when she looked at her own idols, the athletes and figures she admired, it wasn't their flawless moments that made her feel connected to them. It was their vulnerable moments, the times they struggled, the times they let themselves be human. Those were the moments that made her feel seen and understood. And that insight completely changed how she approached her own public image and her mental game on the court.
So at the US Open this year, Coco found herself in a really tough match. She was struggling, she was emotional, and instead of bottling it up or hiding it, she let it happen. She cried on court, right there in the middle of the match, and then she pulled herself together and won. That's not a weakness, that's a totally different kind of strength that most people don't get. Here's where the sarcasm comes in. We've spent decades telling athletes that showing emotion equals weakness, that champions keep everything bottled inside, that mental toughness means a poker face no matter what's going on internally. And then we wonder why so many athletes face mental health struggles, burnout, and the impossible pressure of perfection. Maybe, just maybe, that old-school approach was actually terrible. Coco is talking about authenticity in a way that flips the entire sports culture on its head. She said she tries to show up in every environment as herself, not as some curated version of what people expect a champion to be, not as the perfect, unshakable competitor who never struggles, just as herself. And sometimes she's someone who's overwhelmed and needs to cry to process what's happening. That's allowed. That's human. That should be normal. But tennis, and sports in general, haven't treated emotional expression that way. Crying on court has always been framed as a sign of mental weakness, a lack of control, or an inability to handle pressure. We've seen players criticized for letting emotions show. Commentators question whether someone has the mental fortitude to compete at the top level just because they got upset mid-match. That whole framework, toxic, needs to be torn down. Coco is rejecting it completely. She's saying vulnerability is okay. The best athletes in the world have moments of vulnerability, that it's not something to hide or feel ashamed of. It's something to acknowledge and embrace, because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you better at hiding, and hiding isn't the same as mental toughness. Let's break down what happened at that US Open match. Coco didn't reveal which match or the exact circumstances, but crying mid-competition and still winning tells you a lot. The tears didn't stop her. They didn't make her quit. They didn't break her focus. If anything, letting herself feel those emotions probably helped her refocus and finish strong. Suppressing emotion drains energy. Pretending you're fine when you're not consumes mental resources. Feeling what you're feeling frees up energy for the real challenge, competing. This ties into a bigger shift happening in sports psychology right now. For decades, the dominant approach was all about controlling your emotions, keeping everything in check, and never letting feelings interfere with performance. But newer research is flipping that script, showing that suppressing emotions is actually exhausting and can hurt performance. Athletes do better when they acknowledge and process what they're feeling, instead of bottling it up. Coco is only 21, but she's already figured out something that takes most athletes years, sometimes entire careers, to understand. She said, "No one's life is up all the time. It's all about how you respond in down moments." That's insight usually earned after years of experience and failures. But Coco is learning it early because she's willing to be honest about her struggles instead of pretending they don't exist. The question from journalists that sparked this answer is also telling. They asked if she tries to present herself a certain way, assuming athletes are always performing a role or managing an image.
Coco's answer? She's done with that. She used to care about looking perfect because of the pressure of being a role model, but she realized authenticity matters more than perfection. People don't need flawless role models, they need real ones. Think about what she said about her idols. The moments that made her feel seen weren't their big victories or inspiring speeches, but the times they were vulnerable, the moments they showed they were human. That's what created a connection and inspired her. So why pretend to be different for people who look up to you? Here's the tricky part athletes wrestle with. Vulnerability can feel like giving opponents an edge. If they see you struggling, won't they attack harder? Won't they sense weakness? That's the old school competitive mindset. Never show weakness, never reveal your mental state, lock everything down. But Coco's US Open experience proves that it isn't always true. She cried on court and won anyway. Her opponents saw her struggle and it didn't matter. Vulnerability in the moment doesn't mean you can't compete. This distinction is key. Being emotional doesn't mean being incapable, and crying doesn't mean giving up. Struggling in the moment doesn't equal failure. It just means you're processing something difficult while still performing. In fact, having an emotional release and then refocusing to compete effectively is a far more impressive form of mental toughness than simply never showing emotion at all. Coco also reflected that earlier in her career, she avoided vulnerability to maintain a certain image, which is understandable for a teenager thrust into the spotlight. She became famous at 15 after defeating Venus Williams at Wimbledon, and suddenly every move she made was analyzed and judged. That level of scrutiny is overwhelming for anyone, let alone a teenager. Naturally, she wanted to appear composed and strong, but as she's matured, she's realized that constantly managing an image is exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. Coco emphasizes that vulnerability should be highlighted, not hidden, a conscious choice to be public about struggles rather than suppressing them. That takes real courage, especially in the age of social media, where any sign of struggle can be weaponized as proof of weakness or being overrated. Coco chooses authenticity despite knowing criticism will follow. There's also a clear double standard in how emotion is perceived in sports. Male athletes displaying emotion are often praised as passionate or driven, while female athletes are labeled as too emotional or mentally weak. Coco crying on the court will be interpreted differently if it had been a male player. She's aware of this reality, but chooses to be authentic anyway, which makes her approach even more impressive under heightened scrutiny.
finally, the focus shouldn't be only on her winning the match after crying. The value of vulnerability isn't tied to victory. It's about being honest with yourself and the world, not pretending to be something you're not. Coco happened to win, which is great, but even if she'd lost, showing emotion would still have been valid and important. The goal isn't to manipulate emotions for advantage, it's to be a complete human being who competes professionally. Coco's season proves this approach works. She won 2 titles, including her second Grand Slam at Roland Garros, ranks among the top players in women's tennis, and consistently performs at the highest level. When she talks about vulnerability and authenticity, she's speaking from success, not struggle. She's discovered a winning strategy that integrates honesty about emotions rather than suppression. Experts and fans predicting Coco Gauff could reach world #1 aren't exaggerating. She has the talent, the work ethic, and increasingly the mental approach to get there. Her willingness to be vulnerable and authentic is likely to be an advantage, not a liability, in achieving that goal. Sustainable success demands handling pressure without destroying yourself mentally, and that means processing emotions instead of bottling them up until they explode. Compare Coco's approach to older generations of athletes who maintained a stoic, unflappable persona throughout their careers. Many have shared in retirement the mental toll it took, the constant pressure to appear strong, the inability to admit struggles, and the isolation of feeling like showing weakness was forbidden. Some thrived under that model, but many suffered, only revealing their stories years later once they felt safe enough. Coco is staying ahead of that problem by being honest now. She's not waiting until retirement to acknowledge struggles, nor is she pretending everything is perfect. She's simply being real about the experience of competing at the highest level. That authenticity will serve her well during her career and beyond, because she won't have decades of suppressed emotions to unpack later. Reactions to Coco's comments will be mixed. Some will appreciate her honesty, seeing it as a positive shift in how athletes discuss mental health and emotional experiences. Others will label it a weakness or oversharing. The traditional sports mindset is stubborn. There will always be voices claiming champions must be emotionless machines. They're wrong, but they're loud. What matters is that Coco has found a strategy that works for her. At just 21, with 2 Grand Slams and a trajectory toward sustained excellence, she's not struggling, she's thriving. And she's doing it while being honest about her emotions. That's the model. Sustainable success built on authenticity, not perfection. Processing, not suppression. Acknowledging weakness and moving forward, not hiding it. Coco Gauff has redefined mental toughness by admitting she cried on court and still won. While the rest of the sports world clings to the myth that champions never struggle, she's showing what it really means to be human, and that authenticity is the kind of change sports culture desperately needs. For anyone tired of fake perfection and craving real talk, this is the content to follow.